Welcome to Quill Sword Blogcast. Isolationism is not in America's best interest. George Washington famously advised that the U.S. avoid foreign entanglements. In typical American fashion, we proceeded to ignore it completely and take it completely overboard as it suited us. Washington's warnings were specific to his time, and certainly an accomplished general like Washington had more than enough sense to realize the U.S. had survived the Revolutionary War by the skin of its teeth and didn't need to be trying that again anytime soon. We did, of course, in the War of 1812. The British burned down the Capitol and went home. So we finally took Washington's words to heart and hid under our proverbial bed for the nearly 100 years after that, only poking our nose out to remember the Alamo and to remember the Maine. Both of those were in our own backyard, so at least we weren't involved in Europe's never-ending succession of wars. We just had our own at home. It's kind of a wonder we didn't destroy ourselves before we got this American experiment off the ground. It sure wasn't from the lack of trying. Then we had two very big, very nasty wake-up calls. There comes a time in every person's life when they are forced to grow up. Nation-states are no different. We thought it was World War I, and we did get more mature, but what really snapped us out of our childishness was World War II. World War II is far from a footnote in history. Its shadow is long and still very present in American foreign policy. We will never know the true death toll. Best estimates are around 70, 000, 000, period. That's 70 million human beings that were killed as a direct result of the war. Proportionately, there may have been more devastating wars in human history, but there has never been another even close to the death toll alone in World War II. America grew up in the bloody fields of Europe and in the blood-red oceans of the South Pacific. 400,000 of our sons and even a few of our daughters gave their lives fighting for the freedom and liberty that we take so for granted these days. Only 1/8 of that total would die in Vietnam, and no other war or military action would even come close to that in cost of blood for the United States. We lost more men invading Normandy in World War II than in both Iraq and Afghanistan combined. World War II's scale matters because it is so very hard for us to understand it now. It also matters because America has come into her own as an adult nation state, and she was determined to never do that again. Going home and pretending the rest of the world could take care of itself was no longer an option. The world had changed, and America realized that she would either change with it or spend the rest of her existence cleaning up its mess. So we changed. If you can't beat 'em, bribe 'em. We couldn't actually beat the whole planet, not even with nuclear weapons, and we didn't really want to anyway. What we could do was set up systems that greased a lot of the friction out of the past systems. When every nation state that wants to trade overseas needs a blue water navy to do it, that leaves most nation states out of the market. It also creates all kinds of opportunities for nations with blue water navies to abuse their weaker peers. Nothing ends well. Our plan was just to be the danged world navy. We had mothballed more warships than most world navies had combined immediately after World War II. So it wasn't like the job was that much of a stretch for us then. Plus, all those Lend-Lease contracts were being paid back as the rest of the Allies recovered, so we had the cash. Kind of typical American. Find the simplest solution and do it. It worked. Tiny nation states that didn't even have a single warship could safely trade with incredible naval powers like Britain. It helped that most countries were way too busy rebuilding to bother with privateering, but the reality is that the world could finally safely trade without having to build an entire navy to protect their ships. The U.S. did it for them. I know globalism has become a bad word. Applied to the world government, it is the stupidest and worst thing we've ever come up with, because most of this planet is governed poorly, or by governments that value their power over their citizens' rights. First, we need to learn how to govern well on small scale. Then we can talk about governing the whole world. Probably sometime around the 12th of never, but we'll just have to see. But globalism, referring to free trade, has been fantastic. It allowed developing nations to start pulling themselves out of poverty. It allowed resource-rich nations to sell to more capable manufacturing nations to the betterment of both. Don't get too enamored. Like all else, there's always a downside. The U.S. didn't deal well with either with the loss of jobs it was paying for in lower-paying jobs as they went overseas, or with its incredible brain drain on the rest of the world. No economy can be a one-trick pony, so we've learned, and no nation-state can advance if all their best and brightest move to greener pastures rather than make their own pastures greener. All said, I think it's a net plus. We've not come anywhere near another world conflict. Millions upon millions enjoy higher standards of living. People who face lifelong food insecurity are instead able to buy food from those who can produce it much more cheaply. Babies that once stood no chance of survival grow up healthy and strong. We should rightly be proud of the part we played in that. So let's get to the point. The U.S. has enemies. The U.S. is incredibly powerful, but it is not invincible. The U.S. cannot just leave the world stage without consequences for hundreds of millions of people worldwide, and, in a very self-serving view, without massive consequences to itself. We enjoy a lot of security because of our geography. We're not impossible to invade, but anyone trying is going to pay a horrendous price for the effort, unless we let our guard down. Neither Russia nor China are our friends. They both want to replace the U.S. as the world's only superpower. As many mistakes as the U.S. has made over the decades, do you really think either an authoritarian or a totalitarian government would be better? Yeah, not hardly. Neither Russia or China is a threat militarily to the U.S. Yet. Russia is scared to death of a conflict with the U.S. That's what all the nuclear saber rattling is about. They can't win and they know it. At least not now. China is economically dependent on the U.S. We not only buy their stuff, but we provide that blue water protection their entire economy depends upon. No U.S. Navy, no made in China, and they know it. China's problem is different from Russia's, but it stems from the same mistake. They thought they were strong enough and the U.S. weak enough that it was safe to make their move. Whoopsie! Both are now stuck with their respective messes. Russia has to extract itself from Ukraine with some kind of gain in order to buy time to lick its wounds and regain its strength. China needs to placate the U.S. and back down from virtually every conflict it has started in order to do the same. Russia doesn't really have a good way to get the gain it needs, but it has some hope of declaring victory and going home, albeit increasingly small. China can't lose face, so it's pretty much doomed unless the CCP collapses, which is not beyond the realm of possibility. That translates to decades of rebuilding under the best of circumstances for both. If we repeat our past mistakes and just assume freedom and capitalism will win the day without our influence, they'll both be back, stronger and meaner. Let's skip that. Conversely, if we take our ball and go home, both will thrash about trying to take advantage of our negligence. That's a great way to get a conventional World War III. Eventually, they will feel strong enough to attack the U.S. directly, even if we turn our backs on every ally we've made over the past 80 years. Think not? Russia has made noise already about reclaiming Alaska. Now that's bravado now. But if they think that we're weak enough, it'll turn into a real threat. Russia wants to be an empire. They'll be perfectly happy to move into the American continent doing it, given the time and opportunity. China is already actively bullying every neighbor it has, even including Russia. The Philippines re-allied with the U.S. South Korea and Japan are just as vulnerable as Taiwan. Ever see a bully only take a kid's lunch money only once? Yeah, bully nation states don't stop until they're forced to either. Part of why World War II was so devastating was our late response. It took most of 1942 to get our act together, and we took some nasty beatings in the process. Everyone did. But if we had responded in 1939, would Germany have taken so much European territory? Probably not. Good chance that the Soviets would have sat it out and that Germany wouldn't have invaded Russia. That's more than half the casualties right there. What about in 1934? What if we had made it clear that Germany's annexations were a no-go? Would that have stopped World War II? No, but it might, just might, have limited the scope. Knowing the U.S. was on a war footing would have given the Japanese Empire more than a little pause about trying anything that would bring American might into the Pacific. Hindsight is 20/20, but it's not a crystal ball. Maybe it would have made no difference if the U.S. had asserted itself earlier, but that is extremely unlikely. We can't know for certain, but we do know this. The United States and the rest of the world paid an enormous price to free Europe and the South Pacific, Russia and China, from German, Italian, and Japanese aggression. Maybe we should use that experience to our advantage and not turn our backs on our enemies too soon.